Hi guys, welcome to my podcast. My name's Paul Dwyer and I'll be your host. In 2018, I published a book called Humanitarian, the Real Michael Jackson, which chronicles all of Michael Jackson's many humanitarian efforts, from hospitals and orphanages that he visited, to charities he supported, or just acts of kindness. The book is full of amazing stories of how Michael helped children, families, and people all around the world. He actually did visit more hospitals and orphanages than performed concerts. And in every city that he visited whilst touring, he made sure to give back to those communities. 2 years after I published my book, I started getting contacted by people around the world who had more stories of how Michael had helped them. So many so that I had to revise my book and in 2020 published a new version with more stories. Now in 2023, I'm still discovering more stories of people that Michael helped. So instead of revising my book again, I thought I'd bring these stories into the public domain via this podcast. All the people you'll hear me chatting with have first-hand stories that they will witness to themselves. There's no hearsay or twisting of truths here on this podcast. You'll hear the stories directly from the people that were there. Some of these stories are in my book and some are not. Now, the first episode will drop on June 25th, and I'm so excited I have two very special guests that will be kicking off the podcast. The first is the CEO, co-founder and president of the Heal Los Angeles Foundation, a non-for-profit organisation that was inspired directly by Michael's Heal the World Foundation. I got the pleasure of meeting him and helping him with some work his foundation was doing last year, and I can tell you firsthand he's passionate, hardworking, and a great guy. It's Mr. John Muto. And joining John on the first episode will be another gentleman that I was honoured to meet last year and have stayed in touch with since to organise this chat. And I'm so appreciative of his time because I know he doesn't do a lot of these things. He's the other co-founder of the Heal Los Angeles Foundation and Michael Jackson's firstborn son, Prince Michael Jackson Jr. So here's a little snippet of what's to come on the first episode of my podcast, Humanitarian, the Real Michael Jackson.
I've helped many children, thousands of children all over the world. Cancer kids, leukemia kids.
He's a
Humanitarian.
humanitarian, the real Michael Jackson. So for me, it was a really awesome book for me because, as I mentioned earlier, right, when I'm working on the film of my dad, I've gone through this journey where I have learned so much about a man that I grew up with, but there's so much history that I wasn't there for, So when I read your book and I read through it, all of the stories were so familiar to me because they had been told to me by my dad. What was so impressive to me was to see it laid out on the scale that you did it, going back even to, his early years as a young adult, right? And to see how much he had actually done. And then when you start getting into like the 80s and 90s, how frequent it was. You almost forget that he was on tour during these times. He still had a time not only to donate, large sums of money everywhere that he went, but he also donated his time. He showed up. And from my childhood, that was something he was always very proud of. He was proud of his artistry. He was proud of his heritage, but he was so proud of what that as a platform gave him to do to support the nonprofit and his philanthropic endeavors. And, when I was going through your book, it really sparked this memory. I know my dad was he was proud of his accomplishments, and he always spoke about how he was in the Guinness Book of Records for 2 reasons. I know the 2 reasons that he's in there, but I only remember him talking about how proud he was to be holding the Guinness Book of Record for, I think, the broad scope of how many charities he had actually contributed to or how much he had helped. And
That were on the record.
Exactly. Because a lot of the things, when you speak to people who knew him, or my siblings and I, we would accompany him on these types of trips. And it's Michael Jackson, the most famous person in the world at one point, right? It's hard not to get a photo of him. But there are, in my memory, places that I visited that I can't tell you where they were. I don't remember where they were. I was a child. I just showed up and I was with my father. But there's no coverage of it, and for me, it's like, did it happen? Is it something else? But I remember it happening. And he was just that type of person that, as much as publicity as he had around him kind of everywhere that he went, he still had these opportunities to do things that he wanted to do, helping children, burn victims, people who were less fortunate, that he didn't do it for publicity.
Yeah.
He did it because it was something inside.
So there you go. This is definitely an episode that you don't want to miss. And the amazing chats don't stop there. Over the coming weeks and months, you'll hear stories from ex-employees, friends, and just people that were on the receiving end of Michael Jackson's humanitarian endeavours. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast to get a notification when new episodes go live, and follow my socials for updates and sneak peeks. For more information, go to humanitarianmj.com. Now, an ongoing theme of this podcast is Michael's many humanitarian accomplishments. But I also want to express to anyone listening that you don't have to be rich or famous to be a humanitarian. The only prerequisite to being a humanitarian is being human. The rest is just one act of kindness today, then another, then another. We all have the power to be humanitarians. So I want to put the call out to people listening to go and perform at least one act of kindness today, and let me know on the Humanitarian MJ socials what it is. I can't wait to read your posts, to chat with you, and for you to hear the amazing stories coming up on my podcast, Humanitarian, the Real Michael Jackson. Until next time, I'm Paul Dwyer. Go out and be humanitarians today.